Let's dive right into this explainer. Sometimes the absolute coolest engineering is literally hiding in plain sight, right there on your desk. Today we are unpacking a 60-year journey of something you probably take for granted every single day, the computer mouse.
So, I want you to do something with me right now. Break the fourth wall for a second and just look down at your hand. Seriously, look at the mouse or the trackpad sitting right there under your palm. Billions of us use this little device daily without giving it a second thought. It's become such a fundamental tool, it's basically invisible to us. But just think about the incredible real-time translation happening there. A tiny flick of your wrist, a subtle click, a quick scroll. That absolutely effortless physical movement is instantly commanding this wildly complex machine in front of you. But getting to that seamless connection, that wasn't easy. The device you're touching took decades to invent, almost never made it to the market, and ultimately flipped how we interact with digital worlds entirely upside down. All right, moving on to Section 1, the wooden box. Early 1960s computing. So let's step way back into the early 1960s. Computing interfaces back then were, stark and incredibly frustrating. We're talking room-sized machines. If you wanted to get the computer to do anything, you were punching holes in cards, flipping heavy switches, or typing commands into this totally blank screen. Pointing at something visually, just not a thing. And when engineers first tried to fix this, the solutions were super clunky. They tried light pens that you had to hold up, literally pressing your arm against a glass display. They repurposed joysticks from flight simulators. They even built consoles with trackballs the size of actual bowling balls. It was unnatural, super slow, and honestly, users were basically wrestling with the machine instead of working with it. But then came an ingenious breakthrough from the Stanford Research Institute. An engineer named Douglas Engelbart, along with his colleague Bill English, just knew there had to be a better way. They ran endless time trials, testing knee levers, light pens, you name it. But one device kept crushing the competition. A rough little wooden box that Bill English carved back in 1964. Underneath that wooden shell were two metal wheels set at right angles. One tracked left to right, the other up and down. Moving the box spun those wheels, which turned these small dials called potentiometers, basically dials that adjust electrical resistance. That shifting resistance turned into an electrical signal telling the computer exactly where the user's hand moved. Oh, and because it had a long cord trailing out the back, someone in the lab joked that it looked like a tail. And right there, the mouse was born. The timeline of how fast this idea accelerated is just incredible. They start testing pointing devices in '63, carve the wooden box in '64, and pull off a legendary presentation in 1968. But it took a while to go mainstream. It wasn't until Steve Jobs took a famous tour of Xerox in 1979 that the spark really caught fire, leading directly to the release of the Apple Macintosh in 1984. But we have to pause for a second on that 1968 milestone. It is known today as the mother of all demos. Seriously, on December 9th in San Francisco, Douglas Engelbart got on stage and absolutely blew the audience's minds. He used his wooden mouse to select and edit text live on a screen. He demoed early video conferencing, collaborative editing, and even a primitive version of hyperlinks. All of this decades before anyone had a home computer. It was a single hour of presentation that essentially time-traveled into the future. Which brings us to Section 2, the missing piece, the visual revolution. So here's the massive catch, the real cliffhanger of the story. Almost nobody in 1968 actually had a computer with a graphical screen worth pointing at. Everything was still just text and code. The mouse was this brilliant, perfectly elegant solution, but it arrived years before the world actually needed it. It literally had to sit backstage and wait for a visual revolution. And that revolution finally arrived in the 1970s at Xerox PARC. Researchers there built the Alto, which featured one of the very first graphical interfaces. We're talking a desktop, icons, overlapping windows. You navigated visually, not by memorizing and typing text commands. Suddenly, a keyboard alone just wasn't going to cut it. The mouse was exactly the missing piece they needed. Xerox engineers took Engelbart's wooden design, smoothed it out to fit comfortably in a human hand, and swapped those two clunky perpendicular wheels for a single rolling ball. It was this exact system that Steve Jobs saw in 1979. That visit prompted Apple to license and simplify the design for the mass market, giving us the 1984 Macintosh and putting a mouse in the hands of the general public for the very first time.
All right, Section 3, under the hood, mechanical and optical.
Let's pop the hood and break down the classic mechanical mouse. Step 1, you move the mouse and a heavy rubber ball rolls along your desk. Step 2, that ball presses against two internal rollers, which spin these tiny discs inside the casing. Step 3, those little discs have tiny slits cut into them, and as they spin, they repeatedly interrupt a built-in beam of light. Step 4, a sensor counts how many times that light flickers to calculate your exact speed and direction. I mean, it's a brilliant mechanical system. Though, if you were using a computer in the 90s, you absolutely remember the slightly gross, universal chore of having to pop that heavy rubber ball out to scrape dust, lint, and pet hair off those internal rollers just to get your cursor unstuck.
Thankfully, the late 1990s brought us the optical mouse, which changed the game entirely. Instead of a rubber ball rolling around, an LED or a laser illuminates your desk surface. Then, a tiny built-in camera takes literally thousands of photos every single second. A tiny processing chip inside compares each new microscopic image to the previous one, looking for shifts in the tiny bumps and grooves on your desk pad. It calculates incredibly precise movement from those visual shifts. Honestly, it's remarkably similar to how our own human eyes track motion by comparing one frame of vision to the next.
This generational leap in hardware was a total game changer. We went from a mechanical mouse, full of moving parts that constantly needed to be cleaned, to an optical mouse with 0 moving parts that was dramatically more precise. Eliminating all those mechanical weaknesses practically perfected the entire user experience. Now, what about the click? The click is a beautifully, satisfyingly simple mechanism, especially compared to the high-speed camera sensors we just talked about. Right underneath that button is a tiny mechanical switch. When you press your finger down, you physically close that switch, which completes an electrical circuit for just a fraction of a second. The computer registers that closed circuit instantly. All this incredibly complex movement and clicking data is transmitted instantly to your machine, either zipping as digital pulses down a physical wire or flying through the air as wireless Bluetooth signals dozens of times a second.
Just think about this number for a second. 10,000 plus. Today's high-end mice can track movement well over 10,000 times per second. That is wild. Despite the absolute dominance of touchscreens on our phones and trackpads on our laptops, that level of instantaneous, pinpoint precision is exactly why the mouse hasn't died out. For graphic design, navigating massive spreadsheets, video editing, or competitive gaming, that accuracy isn't just nice to have, it's absolutely crucial.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 4. The man behind the mouse, Douglas Engelbart.
You know, there's actually a pretty bittersweet reality to Engelbart's legacy. His original patent for the mouse, it expired before the device ever became a true commercial success. So no, he didn't make a wild, massive fortune from his invention. Those profits largely went to the giant tech companies that built on top of his initial idea. But the thing is, the hardware itself, that rough little wooden box, that was never really his main point to begin with.
The true visionary purpose behind Engelbart's work is perfectly captured in his core philosophy. He believed that computers should adapt to how humans naturally think and move, instead of forcing humans to adapt to the rigid logic of a machine. He didn't just want to input data a little bit faster. He wanted to turn the computer into an intuitive extension of the human mind. The mouse was simply the bridge that allowed us to stop fighting with the machine and start actually collaborating with it. So the next time your hand finds that perfectly familiar, comfortable shape without you even needing to look down, take a brief moment. Appreciate the sheer marvel of engineering sitting right there under your palm. It took 60 years of trial and error, a handful of incredibly stubborn researchers, and an unyielding desire to make machines speak our language. Which leaves us with this final thought. If a clunky wooden box with 2 metal wheels could fundamentally change the world, what's going to adapt to our hands next? Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you in the next explainer.